A great man once said, "Part of the journey is the end." We've been on a journey together over the past 5 seasons of My Comic Shop history. Now, an entire era of My Comic Shop history draws to a close in the epic 2-part finale. Welcome to My Comic Shop History. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. Now that our look back at the Westchester comic shop scene that has drawn to a close, it's time to take a look at the Westchester scene of today. And joining me for this episode is former Alternate Realities customer, Sandro Prosperino.
Anthony, it's awesome to be here. I've listened to your podcast from the beginning, so I'm used to being on the other side of your podcast. So being on this side now is very, very, very cool. So thank you for having me here.
It's my pleasure. You get to come behind the scenes.
That's right. It's very neat.
See how the magic happens.
Yes.
As it were. So as I was setting up for the recording, just to get myself pumped for this podcast, I listened to some music. Do you want to take a guess what band?
I'm going to go with Nickelback.
You'd be right. So a couple of reasons why I wanted to have you on the show for our penultimate episode here. One is I haven't seen you in a long time. I used to see you regularly, weekly, at Alternate Realities. I was behind the counter. You would come in as a customer. You were always one of my favorite customers. So I felt like it'd be fun to be able to catch up. But also, you're allowing us to come full circle because, as you heard, in the first season of the show, we talked about a lot of the customer nicknames that we had for people.
Right.
And yours was Nickelback because you bore, and you still bear, a resemblance to the lead singer of Nickelback, Chad Kroeger, or Kruger. I don't know how he pronounces it.
Right. I had the longer hair back then, which I don't have anymore, but yes.
Yeah. I know that longer hair, you really had that rock star vibe. I mean, and it's all relative, especially compared to others who might have been coming through the store. You were the closest to a rock star, I would say.
It was fun. It was, but yes, I had the longer hair and it worked then, but it's time to move on, right?
I suppose. And well, even Chad himself, he's gone through different styles
That's
as
true.
well.
That's true.
So I think you still you could pass for him.
All right.
Do you like Nickelback? Not the nickname, but the band.
I've listened to some of their songs. It's not. I don't own any of their music. I don't. I've never seen them in concert. But if it comes on the radio, I'll definitely listen to the music.
All right. I just ask because, as you're likely aware, they receive more than their fair share of hate. I mean, music fans just dump on Nickelback constantly. And so I bring this up to say that this was not meant to be a disparaging nickname at all. I mean, it was said with affection.
No, I got that. And when I remember listening to that episode when it first aired in season 1, and I'm like, wait, that's me. But yes, I mean, you guys had the nicknames for your customers, and it definitely came across as love.
Good. Because not all of them did. So,
Well, that is true. Yes, that's very true.
I will say, not to go off on a tangent here, do I love Nickelback's entire discography? No, not necessarily. But there are a number of songs that I can say I'm a fan of. And I do feel that they receive an unfair amount of hate. I feel like there's this disconnect because they're clearly selling records. They're selling out their tours.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just saying. But so it was a nickname said with affection. And I feel like this nickname came to be probably the summer of the song Gotta Be Somebody.
Okay.
Because that, we would always have the radio playing while we were at the store. And that song was on all the time. So I think it was this perfect combination of hearing that song all the time and us making the connection of Sandro really looks like the lead singer of Nickelback.
Now, do you remember who came up with the nickname?
So this was the brainchild of Thomas Darby and myself.
Okay.
Do you remember Tom?
Yes.
So this is lost now to AR history. I don't know. I feel like it was a team effort. I feel like one of us might have made the connection that you look like him, and then maybe the other actually started referring to you as Nickelback. I feel like there was a little collaboration happening there. Now, obviously, when you heard the podcast, you knew. But did you know previously that we referred to you as Nickelback?
No, you did. I think the first time I heard reference to that was when you were making your first movie.
Good memory, yeah.
And we were getting, you had the sheets for the disclaimers, and you asked me if I wanted to get involved. I said, sure, why not? And then at that point, you did mention it to me.
Yes. And actually, so fun fact, in the closing montage of that original documentary, we have people laughing and doing whatever else. And there's a shot of you really cracking up. And it was when I brought up your resemblance to the lead singer of Nickelback.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So at that point, we discussed the fact that we thought you looked like him, but we didn't get so far. I don't think we got it so far as me saying, hey, we refer to you as Nickelback. And we never addressed you as Nickelback.
No.
I don't it was just more shorthand amongst us.
Right.
The soundbite of yours, and I appreciate that you participated. Thankfully, I have to say, looking back, most of the customers were really cool about getting on camera. There were a few who were like, no, I don't want to, which, so it goes. But do you remember the soundbite of yours that made it into the movie was you were like, the staff's a great bunch of guys, which was very nice. I appreciated that. I wasn't feeding you that.
No, you did not.
But you said that, which was very nice. You were like, the staff's a great bunch of guys. Some of the people who come in here, though, I wouldn't be hanging out with them.
I don't remember that. It's been a while since I saw the movie. I don't remember seeing the entire movie, to be quite honest. But I don't remember what I said and what made it to the final cut. But it is true. I liked coming in there, and you guys always had a healthy debate at the counter about whatever was going on in pop culture, and I never really participated in those conversations, but it was, as I checked what was new and so on, it was nice to hear that in the background, you guys just talking about things and maybe where you're going on Friday night to celebrate something. So it was definitely, what you guys had was pretty special, and I liked listening to it.
Cool. Yeah, that's actually something that I was curious to ask you about, just your impressions of us on the store generally. Because, we have had the customer perspective represented on the show during the first season, but they were typically people who also, became part of the group that went out to dinner, for example. So I've always been kind of curious to get more of like a pure customer perspective. One thing, when I was reflecting on memories that I had of interacting with you at the store, not much specifically really came to mind. Just like generally, you were always friendly. You didn't give us any trouble.
Right.
It was always very pleasant. But I remember one time, going back to Tom Darby, there was one time you came in the store, and I think you were the only customer in there, and Tom and I were working. And I don't know if you remember this, if it would have stood out, but Tom was like ranting about something, and unfortunately I can't remember what it was. It was probably like a TV show or something going on in the comic, but he was so amped up. I wasn't even disagreeing with him. He was just like having an argument on his own, I guess. I don't know. Like he was so adamant about whatever it was he was talking about, very passionate. But he was really going on, and it got to the point where I think when you came up to pay, I was like, I'm really sorry.
I don't remember that.
No.
I don't know. But I mean, so coming into the store all those years, as you mentioned, for the most part, the conversations were limited to the transactions. And, I was very well aware that you guys had your get-togethers. I know there was a nice core of friendships there with who worked there and who came in. I don't know if envy is the right word, but I appreciated the friendships that you guys had there. And, I came in every Wednesday. I had my pull list. I think it was number 43. I don't remember. Do you remember the number?
No, that sounds right, though.
Okay.
We could check with Steve. He still has all the
Does he really?
all the folders. Yep.
Yeah. No, I think it was number 43. So I had my regular pull list, and then I would, hit the check out the rest of the store and to see where the statues, what was new there, or the new releases. And but yeah, for the most part, our conversations were just limited to that. And like I said, it was very just cool to come in and hear you guys talking. And it was obvious that it was much more than just a retail business, that there was definitely a very strong family there. And I, as much as I don't want to say I wasn't a part of the family. I felt like I was, but I was on the peripheral. I was on the outside of that. But it felt good going there. I looked forward to my Wednesdays, just seeing what was new, hearing you guys, seeing you guys, and that 20, 30 minutes that I spent every week was something that I did look forward to.
It's interesting. In retrospect, part of me wishes like with you in particular, that I had made more of an effort to, I mean, clearly, you observed us engaging with each other, but, to have made more of an effort to engage with you. And, I've had the opportunity now going to all of these comic shops and seeing retailers who are very proactive in terms of starting up those conversations and everything like that. So, in retrospect, I wish I had.
Yeah, and that's definitely a two-way street. There's no question that I could have initiated some of those conversations, knowing full well that you guys would be very engaged in them as well. And I'm not sure what it was that held me back on that.
It's funny, since I put out the original documentary and I've been doing the podcast, there have been a number of instances, and this will sound very self-serving, but there have been a number of instances where people have written really nice things, and the spirit of it is like the documentary or the podcast inspired me to start talking to the people at the shop where I go. Like, right. I've heard that a number of times, and that's great. Like, because setting out to do this, it's not like I'm really looking to change lives here, but It's like if someone kind of hears about these friendships that we made and about the community, and they see an opportunity at their store to jump in, and if it gives them any little bit of push to do that, that's really great. So I have heard stuff like that. So that, stuff like that is really cool.
Absolutely. And I know for me, with your first season of the podcast, with Steve closing the store, I just remember for years, there was always talk that he would shut it down. And whenever it would come up, I'm like, yeah, that's just Steve talking. He's not going to shut this place down. And I think that was me being in denial the entire time. So when the decision was made to close, and now were your podcasts coming out while?
Yes.
Okay. So I initially jumped on the podcast, I think to support you, but more just out of curiosity, just to hear what was going on. But I have to say, I didn't expect what I felt when the store closed down. It was, and again, my connection to the store wasn't anywhere near what it was to you and some of the others that worked there. But it had such an impact on me closing and knowing that this place that was such a part of my routine, just going there every Wednesday, seeing you guys, hearing you guys, it was hard. And there's no doubt that your podcasts were so therapeutic in helping me process what I was feeling and to get me past that sadness that I had, and Steve closing the store and understanding and supporting him 100% with that. There was a point where he was asking for help. I think I may have mentioned to him I was thinking of coming by and helping out, but I ended up not going. But I didn't go. I wasn't sure how I would feel in there, and I wasn't ready to walk in there to help him close up. And I think it was selfish on my part. And looking back now, I wish I had gone there because, with Steve is a great guy. And it was, he was AR. There's no doubt his, you can say whatever you want about Steve, but he has a lot of life in him. And that's what made AR so special. And I feel bad that I wasn't there in those final days to even just more morally support him, just to be there and as a friend. So, but anyway, thank you for that season. It was just something that really helped me get over the store closing.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. And honestly, it was therapy for everyone on the show, and it was therapy for me. Like, that was how, I guess, I processed it.
Right.
Like Bill Mayo, who was on the show, the role he played, he handled that move out.
Right.
That store, I think it might still be there if he hadn't come in.
Right.
Because there was a lot that needed to be moved out in a relatively short amount of time. And, so he fought that battle, and I fought the battle on the podcast front. Like, we all had our part to play. And, you said it might not have meant as much to you as it did to me, the store generally. But, everyone experienced it in their own way. And I remember Steve telling me that one of our customers, not someone who came out to dinner with us or anything like that, but just one of the regular customers, UPS Jimmy, he was the loudest.
Is that his real name, or is that his nickname?
Nickname.
Okay.
But you might recognize him if you saw him, and he was the loudest customer in alternate realities history. So if you recall anyone just talking very loudly, a big tall guy too. Anyway, but Steve said that he was so upset over the closing, he cried, like he broke down and cried. I mean, I didn't cry over it, so, but my point is, again, everyone has their own, relationship to it. So even someone like me who was so entrenched in it, I wasn't moved to tears, whereas he was. So,
Right.
Everyone, again, I think everyone had their own relationship to it and reaction to the closing, and, everyone's is valid. And I'm sure Steve would understand if that it really was, too challenging to, to come back and face the end
Right.
like that,
Yeah.
But so I'm glad that the podcast was able to provide some therapy. So that's actually a perfect segue because as much as I always love talking about alternate realities, the thrust of this episode, the title is My Comic Shop Present. So we've spent 6 episodes in season 5 looking back on some of the big Westchester County comic shops that were part of this area in Lower Westchester, and that were specifically part of my comic shop history. So we talked about Heroes World and Comic Book Heaven and Dragon's Den and One If by Cards, Two If by Comics, and of course AR and Jay's Comics. Those were the 6 that we really focused on. Mm-hmm. But before we bring this all to a close, I wanted to spend an episode talking about the Westchester comic shop scene of today. And it's one that you and I were both, essentially forced to become familiar with when AR closed, and we became, as we like to say, alternate realities refugees, and we had to find other shops to go to. So that's kind of what I was hoping to talk about today. So when AR closed, what was your first stop or your first shop after that?
I don't remember exactly which one. I want to say my first stop was to the Spider's Web, and that was through your podcast. So I stopped in. I went a few times. The store and the storefront is very impressive, just immaculate. And you talked about a lot throughout the seasons and how it differed from AR. But I went there a few times. Great store. The owner,
Paul,
great guy. But living in Valhalla, it wasn't so convenient for me to go there. So I went a few times, loved the store, but the travel, it was just too much for me. And then there was another, and then one of your episodes, you mentioned Oh Yeah Comics, which I had no idea it existed. And I'm not sure if you remember, I reached out to you through Messenger, asked you about it, and then you replied. And then I checked out Oh Yeah. And again, another fantastic store.
And we ran into each other there once, right?
I believe we did.
Yeah.
I believe we did. And Mark is very, very personable, very knowledgeable. Again, a fantastic store. But and that is closer.
That's in Harrison. So
right. But again, it was just something was missing, and for me, it was I think it was Steve, is what and what he brought. And again, there's been so many discussions over the years with your podcast about Steve and his personality, but he did have a lot. He had a very big personality, and but I think more than anything that you can say about Steve, he was a very caring individual, very sincere, very honest, and with all things, it's nice to walk into a store knowing that there's not someone there who's going to take advantage of you and sell you a book that's really a third printing and you're thinking it's original, and not to say that that's what was going on at the other comic shops, but I think spending so many years there's a comfort that you get. So I did try those shops, and with both of them, I didn't open up. I didn't have a pull list. I would just walk in, see what was on the shelf, pick a few things up, and I never made the jump with getting a pull list.
So I mean, I want to unpack a lot of that. I think it's very interesting. So when at the time AR closed, you did still have a pull list with us, right? You were reading that that regularly.
Yep.
Like,
I did have.
How many titles were on your pull list?
I would say about 15 books monthly.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't huge.
Yeah, nothing crazy.
No.
So you had the pull list. AR is closing. Now, I know you said you heard about Spider's Web on the podcast, but do you remember Steve referring you there? Because I know he was doing that with customers.
Right. And I think, now that you say that, I think I may have asked Steve, And he did mention he was sending people to the spider's web. Yes. So I do remember that as well. Yes.
Gotcha. Because, Paul, the owner, was a customer did you know Paul as a customer at AR?
No, but I remember that on the podcast, but no, I didn't realize that.
Gotcha. So
at the time.
Yeah, so he was a customer at AR for years and years, and at various points, he had expressed interest in potentially buying AR. I don't know if this was ever actually discussed or was more my wishful thinking that he would open a second AR location. But obviously none of that came to pass, and he just went off and he opened his own store. But no ill will on Steve's part, because, he can be vengeful sometimes.
Yes.
But, they really had great conversations, and I think Steve really offered a lot of guidance to Paul as he was starting out. And so they remained on very good terms. And, when the time came that Steve wasn't going to be there anymore, I know he was telling people like, hey, this is where you should go. And, even now when I go to Spider's Web, whether to shop or film or record, I see former AR customers there more than anywhere else. So
Right.
I think a lot, took that advice and ended up going there.
Right.
What's always funny to me, we've spoken a lot about Steve's closing announcement when he made that Facebook post that
Right.
it was time to close. And I remember, he declared himself, he said, I declare myself the winner. I'm the last true comic shop in Westchester. And I always wondered, and I don't think I've ever asked Paul specifically, what Paul's reaction to that was.
Right.
He might have been like, hey, what about me?
Right.
But again, Steve did refer a lot of people to Spider's Web because at that point, All Yeah wasn't open yet.
Right.
All Yeah opened right after the store closed. Some of the fixtures ended up at All Yeah from AR.
Right.
But yeah, at the time, that was really the place to refer people. And of course, they had the personal connection. So.
Right. But there wasn't much open at that time as AR was closing, right? In terms of Westchester?
And that's kind of the thing, I know this is a simple, obvious statement, I guess, but when we're comparing the Westchester comic shop scene of yesterday and today, there are far fewer comic shops. Just at a very basic level,
Right.
there aren't many. And just as a test today before I came, I went to the comic shop locator online and I just put in my zip code. Half a dozen results came up. And when you filter out, for purposes of this podcast, we count our friends at Undiscovered Realm, but they're not a comic shop.
Right.
They do gaming and they do pops. American Legends, formerly One If by Cards, Two If by Comics, that comes up. But again, they have a few comics. They're a sport card and memorabilia shop. So there are a few places that, that are around, but that they don't specialize in comics.
Right.
So,
They wouldn't qualify.
Right. So when we're talking comic shops, it's Spider's Web, it's All Yeah, it's New York Hardcore. There's one shop that I can't believe, because it's been around for 30 years, and I've never been there. Squiggy's Dugout.
I was going there for a little while. That was one of the shops. And actually, I did have a pull list with Squiggy.
Yeah?
I did, yes. And again, this is all such a blur for me with the store closing. But I was going to Squiggy.
That's in New Rochelle.
In New Rochelle. And again, it was a little out of the way. But, going there, it was always quiet on a Wednesday. I would go on a Wednesday. I did end up giving him a pull list. And just listening to him and talking to him and just sort of connecting on him on a one-to-one level. But eventually I just said, this is getting too much. And also, again, it didn't feel homish enough for me. But that's the only play, actually, that and New York Hardcore I did have a pull list with.
Yeah, I want to get to that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting to hear about Squiggy's. I don't, and I went to high school at Iona Prep. So, I was in New Rochelle's big, but
Right.
I was in, in the town at least. But I never went there. But I think part of the reason why was, and I talked about this in the episodes leading up to this, but, once I started shopping at Alternate Realities regularly, and more so once I started working there, I really never sought out any other stores. And it's funny too. You heard this one in that first season episode with Paul. I apologized to him at the start of the episode that I had only just then, in preparation for the podcast, only just then visited his store, which had been around for a couple of years at that point.
Right.
And I felt bad because it's you want to support him, but I don't know. I try to be self-reflective. I don't know if it was that I just felt such loyalty that I wouldn't even step foot in another store, or if it was just I really had no need to.
Right. And I was the same way. So when I had my pull list with Steve, I didn't go anywhere else. I felt very comfortable with the level of customer service that I was getting with Steve. And so for me, there was that loyalty aspect where I felt like he was loyal to us as customers, and I owed it to him to be loyal to him. I think the only other time I really went anywhere else is more just these comic shows, whether it's a Comic-Con or whatever it was. But other than that, I didn't go anywhere. Or if maybe I was visiting somewhere, I'd check out the local comic store and when I was out of town. But other than that, I didn't step foot in any of the store, and I just felt like, one, just being loyal to Steve, and two, just being very satisfied with the care that I got from going to AR.
Yeah. No, I mean, I hear you. And so, that, I mean, at a very basic level, I mean, I feel like that's, a huge difference, between yesterday and today as far as what Westchester looks like. Far fewer stores. I mean, I think about that stretch of Central Avenue in particular, where there used to be Dragon's Den, right, and then One If right across, and then up the road a bit was AR.
Right. I
mean, you could hit 3 solid comic shops in, within a half a mile distance.
Absolutely.
And again, One If is still there in the form of American Legends, but they don't really do much in the way of comics anymore. So it's very different. And I 100% hear you as far as the logistics go, because I had, and I talked about this in season 2 of the podcast, I had a pull list at Spider's Web for a period of time at the start of the DC Rebirth era. So by the time Alternate Realities closed, I was only reading comics in trade. So I actually did not have a pull list towards the end of AR. So when the store closed, it wasn't like, where am I going to get my comics? That really wasn't a thing for me. But for myself as a fan and for the podcast, I was curious about DC Rebirth, and I was curious about trying to get back into the mode of reading monthly comics and going on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to a shop. And I picked Spider's Web because, again, I mean, if there's, you could almost look at it as like a spin-off of AR. Like, one of our customers who got a lot of advice from Steve, so I think there, in terms of atmosphere and things like that, I think there's some similarities. So it made sense to go there. But, I live in White Plains, and it was, it was challenging to go to Yonkers. For people who know the area, it's by the casino,
right,
and it's
Raceway.
By Cross County.
Right.
It's, not too far from there. It's on Yonkers Avenue. So it was the sort of thing where, as opposed to AR, where it was like, okay, hop in the car for 5 minutes and I'm there. This was like, I really had to plan for this, and now I work a 9-to-5 job. So I'm, contending with rush hour if I go after work. So, going to pick up my comics became like an hour and a half process.
Right. And again, for me, same thing with logistically, it was very convenient with Central Avenue. I mean, most of the times I bring my kids with me. I'd pull in, ample parking, grab what I needed, and then probably head down the street, maybe go to the diner or just take the kids somewhere along the way to get something to eat. But it was very, very convenient in so many ways.
Yeah, well, and then parking's the other issue as well.
Right.
With Spider's Web, I mean, there are metered spots on the street, but, can you get a spot? Do you have quarters? Do you have enough quarters?
Right.
There are unmetered spaces across the street.
I think I may have parked a few times across the street. Correct. Right.
And then there's the post office, which, if you go after hours or on a weekend, I'm not advocating that you park there, obviously, but, that might happen. I might have done that a couple of times, but it was not stress-free, right? And, to your point, it's like with AR, it's like you pull up, you can stay there all day. You don't have to worry about anything. So, right, it became a little bit more, a little, I don't want to say more work than it was worth, but it definitely required more of an investment of time to go and pick up my comics.
Absolutely. And if the parking lot was packed, you always had the supermarket next door, and you could just park there and just walk right across.
Yeah. So you just went a few times and you just pulled stuff off the shelf?
With Spider's Web?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a few times drove down, tried to find parking on the street, walked around, pulled a few things from the shelves, and that was it. Yeah.
I got to say, Paul, always took very, very good care of me, discount-wise, and, in terms of my pull list. I mean, he was very reliable. If anything, sometimes there would be things in there that I didn't want.
Right.
But I asked him, and the sense I got was that it was by design, that he thought it was something that I might be interested in. But here's it's funny, like my paranoia, I guess, where, it would drive us nuts at AR. Like if someone didn't buy something that was in their folder that they had requested, right? Like because this would happen all the time. And I know this came up in previous episodes where like you'd find a stack of books, like people didn't even file them back on the shelf. Like they just put what was in their folder back on the shelf.
Right.
Which, for reasons that have been discussed is problematic. So at Spider's Web, if there was something in my folder that wasn't on my list, like I would make sure I went and talked to him because I didn't want him to think that I was putting something back that I had asked for.
Right.
Because that worried about it.
Yeah. And you guys were great. You pulled exactly what we asked for.
For the most part.
Yeah. Every once in a while, for me, it was a little tricky where I would collect a run of books, but I didn't want the annuals. So every once in a while, the annual would be in there, and I probably should have done a better job of communicating that to you guys. And then, but yeah, I would feel guilt putting something back on the shelf because I was very much well aware that 1, 2 books here or there does make a difference with the bottom line.
Yeah. You mentioned, not necessarily participating, but observing the conversations that we would have at Alternate Realities. Like, was it similar at Spider's Web? What did you find there?
No, I didn't. I don't know if it meant more the time of day that I got there, but to me, there just seemed to be, the amount of, so all the shops that I visited since AR closing, I don't see like the volume of people going to the stores as I did at AR, whether it was the time of day that I went, but it seemed like if you went on a Wednesday, it didn't matter what time you got there on a Wednesday, the place was packed. And, at the other shops, once AR closed, I also went on Wednesdays, and I didn't get that same sense in terms of the volume of people. And with that, you don't have the same type of dialogues. But again, I didn't see it, not to say it didn't happen or doesn't happen, but although I did see it a little bit at Oh Yeah. Again, that's because of Mark, and he's very outgoing, very knowledgeable, and it lends itself to having conversations there, which I didn't see at the other places really.
I hear you. And, it's funny. So switching gears to Oh Yeah and Mark, you mentioned before having built up so much trust, between you and Steve over all those years. And I can identify with that. I mentioned in that season 3 premiere when I recorded with Mark, I met him, we'd exchanged Facebook messages, and then I sold a bunch of my trade paperbacks to him. This was right as they were getting ready to open. So it worked out well. I was able to prune my collection a bit, and they were able to stock up on some trades. So everything worked out well. But, again, I had, only been dealing with Steve for so long. And to go to a new store, same type of, again, not like I thought he was going to rip me off, and obviously he didn't, and he's a great guy and very genuine and very honest, but I didn't know that. Like, it was the first time I was meeting him, and so for the first time in a while, like, I had that feeling of like, oh, like, I don't know who I'm dealing with here, and I don't know if he's going to offer me a fair price for these, Yeah,
absolutely. And even just being fair to Mark and to Paul, and I think a lot of what was in my head was just that, in my head. I don't think I gave those stores a fair chance in terms of walking in there, and I think it's like all things. You go somewhere for I don't know how long I was at Steve's, but it's got to be easily over a decade that I was going there, and I was there through all the different phases of ownership with Steve, and when he wasn't a part of the ownership group, I didn't like going there, to be quite honest. But in fairness to Mark and fairness to Paul, it's not something that they're not doing. I think it's more I didn't open myself up to going there and just again, I don't know. It's almost like maybe losing my spouse and feeling like, okay, it's time to move on, but I'm not ready to move on, even though they're dead. I'm not ready to look. I don't know. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get it. And that's actually, something that I wanted to talk about in this episode because, yes, on the surface level, we'll talk about the shops that are still in Westchester today. But I think on a deeper level, that's something that I've been wrestling with because I miss alternate realities. But more than that, I miss the experience of going and hanging out and talking to the people on both sides of the counter. Like, I do miss that. Yet there are these other shops run by great people who I'm friends with, and I no store has become part of my routine, certainly not to the extent that AR was, but not even close. And again, like I had that brief experiment, with Spider's Web, and it was a good, positive one. Like I don't have anything negative to say other than that it was a little far and there wasn't a lot of parking. But, the experience itself was perfectly fine. But again, like nothing's become part of my routine, and I question why. Like I don't really know the answer. And building off of what you were saying, I think a big part of it probably is not letting go of AR to an extent, or comparing any store that I go to AR. Like nothing can be the same. Nothing should be the same. Like each store should be its own thing. So again, it's not like they're necessarily doing anything wrong, but I think that's probably a big piece of it.
Right. And I do think that for me, I always go with everything, whether it's the current stores now, my previous shopping experience, but it all seems to come back to Steve. And just even the crazy sales you guys would have, whether he was there or not, or just I think everything, to me, I think part of it, if you did it without Steve knowing, that was the fun of it, is doing it behind Steve's back. And
yes,
I'm sure he gave his blessings one way or the other. And when Steve wasn't there, I think there was a brief period of time when Steve, I know Steve was a part owner at times with the store, whether it was in the beginning or in the middle, but there was a time, I think, when Steve wasn't the owner.
Right.
And I don't think I was going to the store then. And I'm not sure if that was a coincidence or not. And when I wasn't going there, I stopped collecting completely. So I don't think that was a coincidence. But to me, everything always goes back to Steve.
I guess that's true of this podcast as well, right. Since he always looms large over a lot of these discussions.
Right. You told me in the beginning, let's talk about the current scene, and yet we're still talking about Steve.
No, it's true. I mean, but I think it's interesting, and I think, it's natural that we're having this discussion this way because, again, to have such a formative experience, it's going to inform a lot of, what comes after. My Comic Shop History is sponsored in part by Acme Comics, the oldest and largest comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina. Acme is a full-service, multiple Eisner Award-nominated business. Visit them when traveling or online now at acmecomics.com. And be sure to follow store manager Jermaine Exum on Twitter at Lord Retail, and tune in Tuesday evenings for his early new release comics reviews. One of our podcast sponsors is a family of film festivals: the Brightside Tavern Film Festival in Jersey City, the Point Lookout Film Festival on Long Island, and the Hang On to Your Shorts Film Festival in Asbury Park. Find them all on Film Freeway, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The 2020 seasons for both Point Lookout and Hang On to Your Shorts are open for entries. Use the discount code SJRHOTYS2020 when you submit. Also, be sure to visit iTunes or ashareduniverse.com to tune into the official Hang On to Your Shorts podcast. So again, you tried Spider's Web, didn't really make sense logistically for you. So Spider's Web, not Spider's Web, Oh Yeah was the next stop. Right.
So Oh Yeah was the next for me. And again, I reached out to you. I couldn't believe there was something much closer to me in Harrison. So I went there and the second I popped in, there's Mark. He prides himself in acknowledging every customer that walks through the door. And right away I felt that, hey, if you need anything, let me know. I'm here to answer any questions. So right away I'm like, all right, Mark's a pretty cool guy. I think I like this place. And, I would see, he said, if you wanted, info on the pull list. And there were times where I was very close to asking about it, very close to taking something home, and I signed up. I did early on sign up to his, getting to receive notifications. And I still do. I still get his emails. But again, I went in, pulled a few things from, a few books from the shelf. Went in a few times and I didn't go back.
So you just teased the man. He kept thinking you were going to sign up for a pull list.
I did. I was that guy. I was that customer. Like, all right, here comes this guy. He's going to walk around. Maybe he's going to buy a book, and then he's going to walk out. And we know, those customers always irritate you. It's like, all right, you're going to come in. You're not going to spend any money, so please leave the store. Stop teasing me.
It's quite well. Listen, you can't always expect that someone's going to buy something,
right.
And at least obviously it would have been worse if you signed up for a pull list and then ghosted him. So I'm sure he appreciated the fact that you came in and that you bought anything,
right?
Yeah.
But
so I guess why? So it was more convenient for you.
It was much more convenient.
Why do you think? Can you? Does it just go back to it wasn't alternate realities? What was it that you think held you back?
Yeah, Steve wasn't behind the counter. I don't know. I think that's the. I think you and I are having a hard time articulating all this, but I think keeping it nice and simple, to me, it is, Steve. It's just, not seeing him behind the counter. And again, my interactions with Steve during the AR days wasn't much more than it was with you guys. I'd walk in, I may ask him how his son was doing. Again, as long as it wasn't busy, of course, right? It wasn't on a Wednesday. But I'd ask how things were going, and maybe I'd see the dog, or I'd come in with my son. Maybe I was holding my son in my arms because he was very young. And then over the years, Steve would say, "Wow, I can't believe how big your son's getting." But it wasn't really much more my interaction than with you guys. But I was friends with him on Facebook. I would see his posts. And even at the end with all I'm closing, I'm not closing. I think we may have a buyer. I think, all that, but
yeah, there was definitely a lot of back and forth on that.
Yes.
Yes, of course, you didn't want to bother him on a busy Wednesday, although he worked hard, especially on Wednesdays, but there were plenty of times, especially when there would be a couple of us working there, where this was kind of the routine, where he would say he was going to go in the back to do work.
Right.
And the process of actually getting to the back room and starting took the whole day. And in fairness to him, it's because people would come in and they would want to talk to him. And then it got to a point where he would sit at the table that was there and kind of hold court while we would ring people up.
Right.
It was nice. Again, I think, really spoke to that, the community. People wanted to come in, and he really held court.
Right. And I guess I was always afraid of the wrath of Steve, and I never felt it. So a lot of it, I thought to myself, okay, was it more having an actual bark than a bite, or maybe I was a good customer? I'm not sure. It was a combination of the two, but I want to make sure I never got there before the store opened. I wouldn't dare knock on the door and, "Hey, Steve, can you help me out?" And the signs were posted on the front of the door: "When to come in, don't knock, even if you see me." So I definitely respected all of that. But yeah, you're right. If I did speak to Steve, he'd stop and talk to me, regardless of how busy he was on that Wednesday.
Yeah. It's interesting with Aw Yeah, because, you mentioned, having kids and, bringing them to alternate realities, right, in the past. Because Aw Yeah, of course, prides itself on being very family friendly. They have the arcade, they have a large all ages section. I mean, that's really, again, in terms of the vibe of the store, very different from the boys club, traditional old school comic shop. Did you take your kids there?
No. So my experience at AR, for the kids, it was a part of their experience growing up, and I think you'll see when you have your baby. Now, do you know what you're having, by the way?
I'm sorry. Boy.
Okay, you're having a boy. Okay, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I think we're going to reveal the name at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
But so for me, it was always in the back of my mind: am I going to introduce? Is this going to become as big a part of their lives, my kids' lives, as it is for me? And I constantly went back and forth in my head with it. So as they grew up, my AR experience, they shared in part of it. And the way they shared in it was more, the bedtime stories. I'd sit down and I'd go through the origins, and my son's eyes would just, they were huge as I talked about these heroes, and somebody crashing from Krypton on Earth, and he can never get enough of it. And he'd always say, "Dad, tell me the story again about." So, and then as they got a little older, I'd buy the books that was age appropriate for them, and again he would eat them all up. My daughter, who's 2 years younger than my son, 1.5 years younger than my son, I've sort of introduced it to her as well. Not as much as my son, and I guess sort of, the whole gender thing, right? Boys read comics, girls don't. And I fell into that trap, which probably wasn't too healthy. But she got into it, and I was getting her the DC Supergirls, those books. But so for them, it was a part of them growing up. But I think I made a conscious effort not to get them too into it. And so as they got older, my son really fell in love with sports, especially baseball, and he went that route. And my daughter, again, sports, dance and soccer, her things. So as they got older now, I would say, hey, do you want to take a ride with me to the shop? No, thanks, Dad. And they sort of outgrew that small phase that they were in. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. On one hand, I'm kind of happy that they found their own niche. But on the other hand, I know how much comics has had in my life in terms of the impact.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, right, like you said, like it's great that they found something that they're really passionate about, but I'm sure at the same time, like it'd be cool to be able to share your passion with them.
Right.
And I guess you figure it's like it's comics, it's like it's colorful, it's superheroes, like it's a lot of action, like it's something that kids you think would be excited about.
Right.
But it's tough, and that's something that I'll be very mindful of as our son gets older. As far as again, I don't want to like shove it in his face. But it would be great if we shared it. So I don't know. There's some balance to be struck. I will say though, if he gets really into sports, that's probably like the greatest fear. Right. Not fear, but like I'm not athletic and I don't follow sports, so that would be a little more challenging for me.
No, Anthony, look, I've followed you a lot in terms of who you are. As obviously you have a great passion for what you do here with these podcasts, and you've got a great occupation. Your wife comes across as an outstanding woman. I love that partnership you guys have. So I will say that you will sort that out. And I'll share with you with my son. Number one, I'm soccer's my thing. I coach the varsity soccer team at Valhalla. Early on, I saw that my son was falling in love with baseball. I didn't have much interest in it. And it took me about 30 seconds to process that my son was going to do his own thing. And what I fell back on is it's his life. He's got to. I have mine. I had my passions growing up, and he's finding his own way. And I will say this: he's opened the door to me with baseball. After the strike, I forget in the late '90s or mid '90s, whenever that was, I stopped with baseball. And he got me back into it. And as a matter of fact, we're touring all the baseball ballparks, and we've done 27 of the 30. And with that, all the trips across the country, to me, it's the time we spend together. So I know I'm jumping off topic here, but I think if your son does become a huge sports fan, I think it's going to open up a whole new world for you and your wife.
No, that's really nice. That's a wonderful sentiment and good advice, and I think that's very true. Being able to share anything and to be able to experience it through his eyes, whatever it is,
right?
I think will be really exciting.
Yes.
Well, I guess bringing it back to and not on a down note, but I wonder then, since your kids are not into it, did the fact that it really caters to kids and all ages, like did that almost backfire in a way for you? Because it's not like necessarily a pull in that case.
No, it wasn't a pull, but it definitely wasn't a push either. As an educator, which is my day job, I think it was. I think growing up, the trap we fell in is that, reading took pretty much one form, and we didn't appreciate all types of genres, and even something like I know for me growing up, reading the newspaper, to me that wasn't reading. Reading a comic book wasn't reading. Now that I'm an educator, I realize that it is. And if a kid, who struggles with reading, if the only thing they're reading is comic books, that's reading, and that's very powerful. So, if anything, I do have appreciation for what Mark does at that they do pride themselves with that. And what's the worst that happens? You build a lifelong customer who started there with them. So I do appreciate what he does there. It didn't hook my family in. Maybe the timing didn't work out. Maybe if I had gone there years earlier, or if they opened up years earlier and Steve had closed sooner, maybe I would have had a different connection with them. But I do appreciate what Mark does there with that.
Yeah, well said. So like I said, I had the pull list at Spider's Web, and then I closed that. And again, I'm really back to just reading trades and digitally, which I want to circle back to because that's kind of an interesting wrinkle in this. But I did have I don't know that you can even call it a full pull list, but I had pulling Doomsday Clock for me. And the earlier issues I was picking up more regularly, the book encountered a lot of delays. I think this will give a sense of how infrequently I went. There were 2 issues at one point that were waiting for me. And if there were 2 issues of Doomsday Clock, that means I wasn't there for like 4 months.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, there were long periods of time where, I didn't go. Again, another instance where it just didn't become a regular part of my routine. Not to harp on this, but I think the logistics play a role. I mean, they're in different directions, Spider's Web and all, yeah, but in both cases, I'm looking at 20 to 30 minutes each way.
Right.
And it's, again, worse if I go right after work. So, parking's a little better at not tremendously, but it is better.
Right.
And at least they're mostly free spots, which is good.
Absolutely.
But again, it just became that sort of thing where it's like I have to, really plan for it. It can't just be like on a whim. It's like, oh, I'll just go run over there. It really becomes more of this investment. And again, going back to this question of like, why hasn't a store become more a part of my routine? It's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess the logistics, that is a reality of it. If were right around the corner, I probably would be there more often. I mean, I have to imagine I would be.
Yeah. I'm not sure what it was for me. Again, as we touched upon, my first shop after AR closing was Spider's Web. Again, didn't pull anything there. Then I went to Again, didn't pull anything there. And then I did end up at Squiggy's. And I did have a pull list there. I'm not sure how long I went there. I want to say probably like a year or so I was going there. And
wait, Squiggy's or
at Squiggy's?
Yeah,
at Squiggy's, yeah. And I stopped going there because he's not a discount guy to my knowledge, if I remember correctly. And I'm like, all right, I'm paying full price for these books. And now Steve, I don't know if you remember, I had a little bit of a discount.
Oh, I remember. That was
Yes.
one of the other things that I always remember that stood
Right.
out about you. So he did give you he hooked you up with a nice discount,
Right.
essentially the employee discount.
Right.
Because
I used to have my own store.
that's right.
Right.
You, not in addition to being an AR customer, you were a former retailer yourself.
Right. So from March of 93 to March of 95, I had, so if you blinked, you missed it. I had a comic book store in Valhalla, right in the little village of Valhalla, in between the dam and, next to the dam and the church there. I had a comic book store. It was called Near Mint Comics and Cards. I was 23 when I opened up the store, and I did it with my older brother. But my brother had a day job. I didn't. And so for 2 years, I had my own comic store. And that's when I first met Steve, because Steve was opening up his shop right around the same time, if I remember correctly.
He opened in June 92.
Okay, so he opened up right before me then, yeah.
So did he come to check out the store?
He did. He came, and I'm 23. I don't, this is my first foray into like being an entrepreneur, and I wasn't cool with it. I'm like, you're the enemy, and that's the way I saw it. And I had other store owners pop in, and those stores will remain nameless, but they weren't the good guys. But Steve, over time, I saw that Steve was a good guy. So when he would pop in, and I think, to be honest too, we'd have customers come in, ultimately something would sell out. And I think my brother Rob and Steve would work with each other. My brother would go, hey, we need a few books. Do you have it? Yeah. And so he'd give us the diamond discount. If we had books he needed, we'd give him the diamond discount. So we started working with Steve in that sense, behind the scenes, where we helped each other out as retailers. And we didn't do that with anybody else. And so that's how I first met Steve. So he was first breaking in, and we started a little bit after him.
Okay. So you were a little wary of him when he came in for the first
time? At first, yes.
Was he friendly when he came in?
He was. Yes, he was. Right. And
he wasn't like, this town's not big enough for the both of us.
No, that didn't come up at all. And I don't know, maybe if he didn't feel threatened by us. Our retail space was very small. I thought we had a nice little setup. I think Steve's store was probably 2 to 3 times bigger than ours. And, he had a sweet location, Central Avenue, right? He's got so much traffic going on there. I'm in a little town in Valhalla, so my clientele's a lot smaller. Parking was a little bit of an issue there, still is in that little part of the hamlet of Valhalla. So I don't think Steve was ever worried about us in terms of losing customers to us. And
Yeah, and it was a different time too. Like, you know,
Yes.
we've talked about it, and he explained, you know, when he sat down to pick AR's location. I mean, he looked at a map of Westchester, and it's like almost every town had a comic shop.
Right.
So there were comic shops all over the place. So, you know, it probably not that it wasn't a big deal when you opened, but it's not like, again, like now, like a store opens, it's like, oh my god, like
Right.
we've increased by a huge percentage in terms of the number of stores because there were already so many.
Right. Yeah, at that point, in the early to mid 90s, it was booming with the amount of comics. Comic stores were popping up all over the place, especially in Westchester. And, you know, there was one in Mount Kisco, there was one in Pleasantville, there was one in Hawthorne. I mean, there was a bunch of shops that were all just popping up all over the place. And, but yeah, so, you know, when Steve first came in, I'm like, oh, why is this guy coming in here? What is he, you know, is he trying to steal some ideas or check things out or whatever it was? But that quickly went away. And again, I'm not sure if my brother knew Steve before the store opening. I don't think he did. And they really hit it off more than I did with Steve. But then once we closed the store, my brother was done with the books, and I wasn't. So I maintained that relationship with Steve.
And then did you start shopping at AR like right after?
I think once I closed up, I was done with comic books for a while.
Okay.
So I didn't. I just stopped because I brought my own collection into the store. And when the store closed, I sort of washed my hands of everything, and I didn't take anything with me from the store. I had a cousin who helped me out a lot, so he took a lot of the sports. I gave him the sports cars because he helped out with the, you know, some of the structural stuff of the store. But yeah, I was done completely, and so my original collection, I left it in there. So after I left, eventually I started up and I started my collection from scratch again. At that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you able to rebuild?
Yes, I didn't have a whole lot of books back then. I'm at the point now where I have about a little over 13,000 books. So
Not a small number.
no, not a small number. And I've scaled back a lot.
So the store lasted for a couple of years.
2 years.
So what happened?
The store did well. We didn't lose any money at any point. We weren't making any money though. Actually, I should rephrase that. We made money, and whatever money we made, we reinvested back into the store. Whether it was making the store nicer, just building up the inventory. So we kept reinvesting into the store with the money that we made. But for me, we had a 2-year lease, and then we had 3 1-year renewables. So it could have ended up being a 5-year lease total. So as we got to the end of the second year, I'm 25 now. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm having a lot of fun, but I'm not gonna be able to support an eventual family in this industry. That was my take on it. So at that point, I said, let me just cut my losses here, and move on to the next thing. So I just to me, I saw the writing on the wall with that.
Right. Well, I mean, it sounds like you made a responsible choice.
Right. So, and I have to say, like, listen, I guess, especially with season 1. I was I was like in the Steve camp with everything that was going on, and very sensitive to all the issues he went through, especially the pull lists and how they stacked up. For me, here's my feeling. So Steve did it for what, 20 years?
23 years.
23 years. Here's my feeling on that. The day you have a store for more than 23 years, you can have an opinion on how Steve should have ran the store. That's my honest feeling.
Okay.
That whole pull list and people not coming in, a lot of people made it a very simple issue in terms of how to solve it. And I will tell you this, I know when people went on and kind of, Steve should have did this, Steve should have done that, and then Steve came on to defend himself. I said, these guys don't know what they're talking about. And with all due respect, because I know from my experiences those 2 years, I had my customers who didn't come by to pick up their books. And when I closed the store, there was probably thousands of dollars of books that were on the pull list that weren't picked up. And I have to say, you saw it as it started to build. You would call the customer up, and I'm like, listen, I'm not pulling any more books for you. And it was always the same thing. No, I swear, please, don't. And they would come in. Ultimately, they would pick up maybe half of their books or a quarter of their books, and they would promise to be in the week after. It was the same thing over and over again. And obviously you want to pull the plug on those guys. I know Steve would have that dead list, right? The people that were dead to him.
Yeah, various stages of death.
Right.
Yes,
right. And so he would get. I guess depending on how badly you burn Steve is where you fell into things. But I think when you go into business, you pride yourself on customer service, and when those customers come in, you want to take care of them. And it's hard to differentiate when someone comes in and tells you that they're going to get those books. They mean it. But the reality is that when you prioritize the expenses you have at home, whether it's mortgages or whatever it is, comic books are going to fall pretty low on the list in terms of where you're going to spend your money. So
right.
People sincerely meant they're going to come in and get those books. And some very few made good on those promises. A majority of them didn't. And I think it was one of your recent podcasts. You mentioned like another store closing. Was that or no? I don't know if I just made that up or not. But I think I read somewhere another store closing somewhere, and they mentioned the reason was they put on Facebook.
Right. Yeah. And not someone that was on the show.
Right. They weren't on the show, but I think
that we mentioned them.
Yeah, it was a mention. But my feeling was when unless you own a comic store for 23 years. You should probably keep your opinion on what Steve should have done to yourself. Because I will say this. I think being in business for yourself for 23 years is impressive. What makes it equally impressive is doing it in the comic industry. And I think you know this, Anthony. There are very few people in this country that have had a successful comic shop for decades. A comic shop as their primary source of income for decades. So, look, I was one of the few. I was one of the many that tried, but 2 years, saw the writing on the wall. Steve did it for 23. So the last thing I would ever do is to tell Steve, Steve, I think you should have done this differently. And again, it's like a lot of these guys. I think I saw somewhere, and Steve every once in a while post something, and like maybe a guy like Drew. With all due respect, Drew. Steve knew what he was doing. And Drew's an awesome guy, by the way.
Fair enough. No,
Yeah.
I appreciate your, impassioned defense of SCO. And, I know, there were some during that first season who felt like we were being a little hard on him. And I mean, you have to include me in that because I shared my own opinions on this. I mean, I was there to facilitate the discussions, but, I had my own point of view on it as well. So, I mean, I certainly,
Right.
appreciate that.
Right. No, and I did feel for Steve. When not that there was any piling, I think everybody meant well. I think the reason people were critical of Steve was not, I think because they wanted the store to keep going, not because they were critical of Steve and
Right.
so on.
No, I think it ultimately all came from a good place.
Absolutely.
It was from people, we always like to say, like, we do consider ourselves a family, and it's like, we can say these things about
Right.
him, but like other people can't.
Right.
I think there's a little bit of that, from the show's perspective. I liked that first season had some teeth. Even if people, or especially if people listening are like, are getting riled up, like,
I did.
that's okay. I mean, I think it made for interesting listening. I mean, I will say most of the people on the show in that first season they didn't have the tenure, the length of ownership, but had owned the store
Right.
for at least a period, or like myself or Tom or some of the others, like had worked there as well. So it was, I mean, I feel like we did come at it from, a place of some insight and knowledge. But in Steve's defense, and to your point, I do think that is a good one. The fact that this little wrinkle of people promising to come, and occasionally they would.
Right.
And then, of course, it becomes this really tricky thing because there's always the potential that someone will be true to their word and show up and pick up their stuff. Because I guess that was always the thing. Like, he held the books for so long.
Right.
But yes, every now and then, like, someone would show up, and it's like, well, it's a good thing we held them.
Right.
But, obviously as the owner, he had to calculate what risk he was comfortable with. And, he got to the point where then he didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. No. So I was a little sensitive to all that. But anyway, this all came about now. You and I talking about this is because I had my own store. So when I was going to AR, Steve gave me it was the same discount you got. Is that it? The employee discount? Okay, so I was getting the employee discount, and
we got 25% off.
25%. And actually, on my number 43, I think it even said it on it, like 25%. And but you guys knew that when I would come in, and always took care of me. Every once in a while, someone would fill in, and I'm like, no, I'm like, I get 20%. You got to check the file, and you guys always made good on it. But
that's what would happen. I feel like I'm sure that happened to me. Either you said it, or maybe if like Steve was next to me, he would have said, "Oh, he gets 25%." Because again, typically the reservists would come up, whatever amount they spent would get added to the credit system, and then when they spent $100, they get the $10 credit.
Right.
So obviously you were in a special category, and so from the start, it definitely made an impression, and a positive one. I was like that's generous of Steve, like just out of a professional courtesy, to do that. And it's funny with the store discount. So under Steve, employees got 25%. You mentioned there was a period where Steve was not one of the owners, and as I've been told, when Brandon Montclair was one of the owners, he would allow employees to buy things at cost. So it was more of like a 50% discount instead of 25. But to Steve's credit, like anyone who worked at the store and got that 25% discount, he never took it away. We always had it, even if we stopped working there. And again, even to do it for even a former retailer, but even a rival, former retailer. So definitely very generous of him.
Now, when I first started going to AR, and this is before you were there, my discount was 50%. So he gave me I bought stuff at cost, and that changed during one of the ownership changes. And there was a time when there was this other Steve.
Yeah, Steve Chin.
Yes. And
the Steve Chin years are like a weird period of AR history.
I have to say, I don't know if Steve Chin is listening, but I was not a fan of Steve Chin. No. And let me rephrase that. I wasn't a fan of him as a retailer. I didn't feel the same kind of love that I felt with Steve Otto. And he right away squashed it. He's like, you're not getting 50%. It's like, who are you? And I think he changed it. Steve Chin at 25%. And that's the way it was. And then when he left, I just, I'm like, I'm not going to ask Steve to go back to the old ways. He's been good to me.
Gotcha.
But but it changed from 50 to 25%. But he gave me like the retailer discount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's cool to hear about the store that you had. Because again, I really never had any details, only just that you had a store once. That was it. Right. So it's interesting to hear about it. I love the name. We always would joke at the store. Somewhat of a motto became like, it's good enough. Like if we were pretty meticulous with like inspecting the books and things like that. But Steve got a little more lax as the years went on in terms of what really counted as a damage.
Right.
And so it became a little bit of a motto / running joke of like, it's good enough. So our joke was like either good enough comics or very good comics.
Right.
But you were near mint.
Right. We talked with that. We're like, all right, we can't be perfect. We're not going to be mint. But you know what? Pretty close to as good as that. So
yeah, you want people to have reasonable expectations.
Right, exactly.
Like mint comics.
Yeah, you're like, all right, come on. Like you walk in, you're like, all right, you guys are mint comics. Give me a break.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were striving for mint, but we were near mint. And but I have to say, the thing that I enjoyed the most were the friendships that I made there during that 2-year time period. I made some friendships that I still have today. Some I had some phenomenal friendships that I lost touch with. And I think about certain guys. I'm like, I wonder what this guy Bill's up to, and and I haven't seen him since the store closing. Right, 95 is how many decades ago that is, and but that was the thing I enjoyed the most was the friendships. But that wasn't enough to kind of keep the store open. Like I'm not gonna keep it open because I'm making some friends. That my friendships aren't gonna pay the bills.
Right, that'll only get you so far.
Yeah.
So returning to, Westchester's comic shop present, I want to talk about your experience at New York Hardcore. Yeah. But one other store that I neglected to mention that I guess it counts, Newbury Comics in the Westchester. Have you been?
I have been. My kids are more into it than I am. I think just because you walk in and you're overwhelmed by just everything. I think it's a cool store to walk through, to see everything in there. All the pop culture that's in there. But I have been in there a few times with my kids, but it's more, and actually it got to a point where I think they do give a discount on a pull list, if I remember correctly. And while it's in White Plains, which is next door to Valhalla, again, there's the parking, paying $3 to park. And so that to me didn't seem so convenient after all. But so I went in a few times, bought a few little things. I'll end up in there right before the holidays, let's say, or I'll go in there to buy something for my daughter for Valentine's Day, whether it's like a Stranger Things that she likes, that she's into, or whatever. But yeah, I popped in a few times, and yeah, I'm not sure if I would slotted into our definition of a comic shop.
Yeah, and I guess, that again goes to the overall shift. Not only are there fewer stores, but different types of stores.
Right.
Again, All Yeah is a different type of comic shop than all of the ones really that we've discussed on the podcast this season. I mean, I feel like Comic Book Heaven and Alternate Realities were somewhat kindred spirits, like mom and pop, a lot of stuff, a little messy, eccentric people there. I feel like they kind of had some similarities. And then you have like Heroes World and Dragon's Den. They were part of larger enterprises, so they were kind of their own thing. You had One If by Cards, maybe somewhere in between. And then again, of the stores that are around now, again, you have Oh Yeah, which really caters to kids and families. You have something like Newbury, which is part of a larger chain originating out of Massachusetts, and really more of a pop culture store. So you go in, like you said, and there's all the Funko Pops. They have records, they have apparel, and then they have like their comics corner.
Right.
But I mean, funny enough, that's the most convenient comic store to me right now, where I am in White Plains. I mean, I'm minutes away from the Westchester Mall.
Right. I mean, you could practically walk to it, right?
Yeah, we don't, but we could.
Right. And actually, for me, I grew up in North White Plains, and my first comic shop, which this isn't what it is, right, with this podcast, but my first one was Heroes World, and I would walk 3 miles each way and I guess it was Wednesdays too when they first popped open. I'm not sure. So whatever day the books were coming in, I would walk with my brothers, and we'd walk, and a couple of our friends, we'd walk and just, talk for the hour it took us to get there and buy our comics, and the hour back. And, but that was my first comic store. But yeah, you could probably walk there. Maybe you will with the carriage, with the baby.
Yeah. I do plan on, I don't know if we'll walk to the mall, but I feel like that'll be good. Like walk him around the mall.
Right. Absolutely.
So we'll maybe pop into Newbury Comics. So that's not a place that I've gone on any regular basis. Sounds like you haven't either.
Yeah,
but
same.
it's there. I guess it fits in well with the Westchester. I will say it's nice at least having a store that I'm interested in going to there, because there's not much else that's like really appeals to me at that mall.
Agreed.
Yeah. But so there is that, in fairness. But tell me about New York Hardcore, Dobbs Ferry.
Yep. So I stopped going to Squiggy's because I was paying full price for the comics, and having been with Steve all those years and getting 25% off, I heard about New York Hardcore opening up, went there, checked it out, and then right away I said, you know what, I still want to keep a pull list without having to pay full cover. And they had like a little scale, sliding scale. The more you buy, the bigger discount. So I think I may have given them whatever I needed to get to the 25% off. So did that for about a year with them. And again, my time there was a lot quicker than it was at AR. Popped in, grabbed what I needed, and popped out with minimal interaction. Again, the people there seem very nice.
It's a crew of guys.
Yeah, they're a crew of guys, and depending, I even though I went there on Wednesdays, there seemed to be a different person there on the Wednesdays. But there was a crew of guys, seemed like very good guys, absolutely. And then what ultimately led me to stop going there, which is recently, I want to say in the past year, actually a little over a year ago, I stopped going. And the reason I know that is because we bought a second home. And at that point, I'm like, all right, I got to prioritize here. And I made the decision to stop with the pull list, called them up, explained to them that I wasn't coming anymore. Again, being very sensitive as a former owner to make sure that I didn't leave them with a pull list of books. So, and that's it. So I haven't had a pull list since then. And I haven't popped into, other than the free comic book day recently, where I went to, Oh Yeah. And I have to say, he did an awesome job there with that. Just the vibe that was there. So kudos to Mark for just, having the artists there and the tent out and the side there with all the books. And I was pretty impressed with his free comic book day. I mean, I think, and this, there's a difference there where Mark clearly has embraced comic book day versus Steve.
Yeah, Steve had a different feeling about the event. But so New York Hardcore, I was at their original location once because they moved.
Yes, they're in Dobbs Ferry, and they moved a few stores down.
Is the new spot bigger? Because the one I went to was small.
I think it's slightly bigger. Wasn't much bigger, but no, it was bigger, but still on the small side, comparable to what I had in Valhalla when I had my shop.
Right.
Yeah, but on the smaller side of comics.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I guess so. What was it that? Well, I guess so. You had the pull list at Squiggy's,
Right,
and then you switched the pull list over there,
right.
So you went further with those stores than you did
Yes.
with like Spider's Web or all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't put my finger on it in terms of why Squiggy's and New York Hardcore and why not with Spiderweb. I mean, Spiderweb's more just going to Yonkers was a hike for me, and I'm not sure with to be honest. Does Mark give a discount for pulling comics? I don't even know, to be honest. He probably gave it to you maybe as a courtesy, or no?
Yeah. Maybe the latter. I'm not 100%
Okay.
sure. Yeah, I definitely get something when I go. I don't know
Right.
if it's as a courtesy or
Right.
if that's part of their pull system. I will say one thing that I really do like about having a pull list at is the email notification when something comes in. I like that.
Yeah, Mark does a tremendous job with that. It's obvious that he spends time with that, and it's very thought out. Whether again, there's a respect that he has for his customers. If he's going to change the times of the store for whatever reason, he sends out an email. I know for me, there were times where I would show up to Alternate Realities. It wasn't often, but the store was closed because something was going on that week. And so Mark does a great job with that. Where he's and not to say that Steve didn't have a respect for his customers, but Mark thinks about these things and does an excellent job with it.
Right. So you're at the point now, no pull list.
No pull list.
And the plan, I know you had told me ahead of time that you're making a list of the books that you would be getting.
Right.
And you might try to pick them up at shows, at conventions.
Right. So what I'm currently doing now is I on my phone, my notes tab there, I weekly I check what's coming out on Wednesday, just add it to my list. And every once in a while, I'll hit some of these smaller comic shows or wait to the big Comic Con, New York Comic Con, and just see what I find there. It's going to create some gaps. I know you had one of those episodes about being a completist.
Yeah, I mean, as a collector, are you okay with that? Running the risk that you might miss something.
Because I fall under that category of being a completist, regardless if I'm enjoying the storyline. So yeah, I've been okay with it. I think as you grow older, you get okay with certain things. But yeah, and I'm seeing it now. I'll find certain books in the dollar bins, and I'm like, all right, got a pretty good deal here. But the reality is now I don't have a run of current books anymore, which doesn't lend itself to staying current in terms of the reading. Not that I have a whole lot of time nowadays, but I do have a lot of holes in the current books. I'm not sure how much longer I'm gonna do it this way, to be honest. I think, when you talk to collectors, a big part of the thrill is that walking into that comic shop on Wednesdays. There's something about walking into a comic shop on a Wednesday and seeing what's on the stand.
But now you're going to have the thrill of the hunt.
So
I don't know. There's something to be said for that, at least.
There's no question about that. The thrill of the hunt of like going through a box and finding it, and also and there's going through a box and it's not alphabetized is rough. But when you find that guy that's got a cheap set of books and it's alphabetized and it's fun.
So, again, I'm in a similar position. I mean, I'm not planning to do, what you're doing necessarily, but I don't have a pull list with, the exception of, recently having Doomsday Clock. Like that was it. But, that's, I guess, something else that I kind of wrestle with, right? So the one question is like, no store has really become part of my routine. Why is that? Is it that I'm not open to a new store? Is it that, a half hour is just too far to drive? Like, what is it? But the other thing that I kind of wonder is, am I not making more of an effort, or am I not really committing to a store and going regularly because I'm not interested enough in comics at the moment? Like, I still read things, and obviously I do the book club podcast and things like that, but I'm certainly not as plugged in or passionate as I used to be years ago. So is it that, or, I guess I'm curious about the relationship between the interest level in comics and the shop experience. Like, if there were a store that were a little bit more convenient and or that reminded me more of alternate realities, like, would that get me more excited about comics?
So when you reached out to me originally, you didn't give me much information. You just say, hey, I'd like to have you. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And I was figuring it was about AR closing, and you did make reference to some of the current shops. So, and walking into today, I didn't have, I don't think I wasn't able to articulate why AR and why I haven't found that AR now. But as we've gone through this discussion, right, we're here now, we're about an hour into this. To me, I just feel like everything, it has to do with everything. Just the timing of where we were, and for me, where I was in my life, the location of the store, who was behind the counter. I think it was like the perfect storm, the perfect scenario. And an hour into this, I don't think I'm going to ever find my new AR, and I'm okay with it. Steve has his legacy that's safe in my book for whatever it's worth. But I just think it's everything. It has to do with everything, whether it's the parking, you guys being there. As much as I talked a lot about Steve, you guys had a lot of personality. The guys behind the counter, and you guys had your club and your dinners and your nickname for customers. There was a uniqueness that really that AR captured and made it such a fun family environment. I just think that everything worked perfectly at that point in my life. Now I'm a little older, second home. I'm thinking about my kids going to college someday, and selling some of the books, maybe helping them pay for their college books, whatever it is.
Well, you said it very well, and I think that concludes our episode. I mean, I really think that's a nice note, to go out on. I mean, we'll chat for a few more minutes for the after show.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about your son's name and the after show. So you have to.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think that, that really encapsulates a lot of what I've been feeling and what we've been talking about here. And it's been great to get your perspective on alternate realities. You're a new voice on the show here, and obviously someone that I was looking forward to catching up with. But having a new voice and getting a perspective that we haven't, had yet, it really has been great. And again, hearing about your experiences with today's crop of comic book stores in Westchester, was awesome as well. So is there anything else that you want to say before we conclude?
No, not at all. I guess more on a personal note from me to you, Anthony, it's been pretty impressive what you've done, how a comic book store closing, what it's done to your life, and the direction that you've gone in with it. I would just say that as you and your wife embark on a new journey, which is your family growing, and your life will never be the same in such a good way, I would say just make sure you really, one of the pieces of advice I got was you can never take enough pictures, and it's true. I don't think you can't do too much with your son coming along the way. So documenting that new journey, you'll never look back and regret it. So I just want to say congratulations to you and your wife with the baby coming, and keep up this fantastic work that you're doing. I'm enjoying the ride, and I hope that as things get a little busier for you somehow find the way to keep doing this.
Well, we'll see about that last part. But thank you so much. I appreciate your kind words very much, and all of your support. I know you reached out during the first season of this, and I've heard from you since then, and that really means a lot. Thank you, and thank you so much for being part of this episode. Thank you to everyone for listening. Be sure to head on over to the Patreon page to hear our exclusive after show, and then come back here in 2 weeks for the grand finale. Until then, don't be a flat squirrel.